So for this next part here, we are going to go back to the shape tool and we are going to right click and we're going to use the Polygon tool, which is probably a tool that we really haven't used a lot. So go ahead, click that. And there are a few settings that we need to make sure that we have on. First off, we want the sides to this to be an even number. I'm going to go ahead and set mine at 50. You guys can do more or less. I would recommend not going any less than 30, but make sure it is an even number. Otherwise, your checkers later on will be off, okay? And then you need to make sure that the star is selected. And we want this indent sides to be at 99%, okay? And you can go ahead and just leave this up here. This color doesn't matter right now. So now what we are going to do is we are going to put our cursor right on the middle of where that vanishing point is, and you are just going to click and drag. And you can see we are getting all of these vertices that are happening now. So what I want to do is where this pink smart guide is that's showing up, I want to make sure that I use that as a guide so that it's directly on that line. So I'm just going to drag this out until it fits. It doesn't need to go all the way off the page. It will on the lower bottom, but once you have that and it's perfectly centered, just go ahead and press, let go of the mouse, and we are ready to start with some of that magic, okay? Now I should have changed this to black, but I didn't. But, oh, there we go. It is still black. Okay. So now what I'm going to do before we can move on to this next part, we have to merge some layers together. So if you don't need this vanishing point any longer, you might want it later on. You might not need it. I'm just going to drag these down to the bottom above the background. And then I'm going to merge the ellipse layer and the polygon layer together. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself here. So what we need to do first, you see how all of these lines look they're very straight. We want it to look like they're curving a little bit. So to do that, we are going to go up here and we are going to go to Edit, Transform. And we are going to go ahead and do the warp selection, okay? So now what this is going to do is it's going to let us curve this a little bit. But there's one thing that we need to do, we need to keep in mind. So keep in mind where this vanishing point is, where this horizon line is. So that's where we don't want to hide it yet. But whatever you do, think of this as the line of symmetry, okay? Whatever you do on this half, you need to do on this half as well. So when we're talking about here's our horizontal line of symmetry, whatever we do up here on this top half, you need to make sure that you then replicate to the bottom in some way. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So what I'm going to do is this one here, I want to keep this one as straight as I can because this is where our line of symmetry is. But this one here, I can curve out a little bit just like that. But notice that vanishing point is getting a little bit off the center. So what you need to do is make sure that the line on the opposite side, you curve out as well. So use the grid to help you to kind of eyeball it a little bit. So maybe you're halfway in between here. Make sure this one then is halfway in between the grid lines there, okay? So you're going to continue that all the way around and work on it one side over here, then one over here, so otherwise it'll get all sorts of out of whack, okay? So I'm going to speed this up so that you guys can kind of see how this works, and then I'll get back to you here in just a little bit. All right, so once we have, so there's just going to be very subtle curves as you go around. And once again, make sure that with that ending, that you make sure that that is on top, as close of on top of that vanishing point as it can be. Okay, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. It's just going to help with the illusion a little bit. Okay, so now we are ready to hide that horizon line and vanishing point. And we're going to merge the polygon layer and the ellipse layer together by highlighting both, right-clicking, and merging the layers, okay? So now we are ready for the fun part. And this is going to be just simply filling in the shapes as if it is a checkerboard, okay? So you can really use whatever color you want. I'm just going to use black, but it can get very, very confusing. So what I would recommend right now, because we got a lot of lines going on, go ahead and go to View, Show, and turn off the grid so that we just have the lines that we need. Then, as you go and do this, as you fill in these spaces, just make sure. Okay, so now as you go and fill in these spaces with your bucket tool, you just want to make sure that, since it can get very, very confusing, that you just follow a pattern. So I would start by taking a ring and just going every other. Okay, and so it's very important, like I said earlier, that you have that even number. Otherwise, we would have had like 2 whites in a row or 2 blacks in a row. So from here, we don't need to worry about this outside stuff right now. We're actually going to get rid of that later. But what we're going to do now is we are just going to finish this checkerboard pattern. So I will speed this up for you. Okay, so now that that is completed, I'm actually, this last part here, we are just going to fill that in with a solid color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the marquee tool. I'm going to take the ellipse marquee and I'm going to drag a selection. Now, if I go and move this, it's not going to work. So what you're going to do is go up here to select and do transform selection. And then we can fit this so that it fits within the space that we want. And then we'll have a perfect black fill. Okay, so that's pretty good. You can see that I have a little bit of a space that I missed, so I'm just going to zoom in, and you can either just take the, make your brush tool pretty small to go in and get that, or you can just use your bucket tool. But you can just run it along the edge there, and we should be good to go. Okay, so now we want to do kind of a similar thing. If you don't trust yourself to erase the lines on the outside, so you can use the marquee tool like we just did, or you can simply take the eraser tool and get rid of those lines there. I'm going to go ahead and just use the marquee tool. Okay, so now for this one, I'm actually going to go select inverse, take my eraser tool, and then it's going to erase everything on the outside. So now we are done with our design that we need to do. And if we were to place this, and I'll show you a couple of different ways that we can do this. But now, if you don't like just whatever color the background is, if you want it to be a little bit more interesting, you can go in and change the background, okay? You can get really fancy with it, and you can play with different textures and patterns and gradients using your gradient tool to kind of get even a cooler effect. So if you want this to look even more whole-like, and if we printed this out like it would and just looked at it from the right angle, we would get that illusion. To erase some of these lines here as we resize it, but not a big deal. Okay, so now when we print out this design, we are going to get a really awesome illusional effect that's going to look as if it is a hole.